shattered armor. Tony Stark had built his life around control. Control over his company, control over his technology, control over the suit of armor that turned him from a man into Iron Man. With his unmatched genius and unrelenting drive, Tony had always believed that he could solve any problem, beat any challenge. But as the years passed, a fear began to grow in the back of his mind. A fear that maybe, just maybe, there were some things that not even Iron Man could control. He had been haunted by that thought for weeks, ever since his last encounter with a force unlike any he had ever faced. It wasn't an enemy he could outthink or overpower. It was something darker, something that seemed to twist reality itself. Tony's once clear world of science and logic had begun to blur, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make sense of it. Late one night, as Tony stood in his workshop, staring at the countless suits of armor that lined the walls, he felt a sense of unease settle over him. The room, usually filled with the hum of technology and the glow of screens, felt cold. Silent. It was as though the very air had thickened, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. Stark. The voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the room like a gunshot. Tony's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the shadows for the source of the sound. But there was no one there, just the cold, empty room. Stark, you can't control it. Tony's heart raced, his hands clenched into fists, his mind racing through the possibilities. Was this some new villain? A ghost from his past come back to haunt him? But even as he considered the options, he knew that this was something different. Something worse. Who are you? Tony demanded, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. There was no response, only the oppressive silence. Tony turned back to his workbench, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over him. He had faced down gods, monsters, and men with the power to destroy worlds. He wasn't going to be scared off by a whisper in the dark. But as the days passed, the whispers didn't stop. They followed him, haunting him in his dreams, creeping into his thoughts during the day. You can't control it, Stark. You'll never be enough. No matter where he went, no matter what he did, the voice was always there, a constant reminder of the one thing Tony feared most, that he wasn't in control. Weeks passed, and Tony's world began to unravel. He threw himself into his work, trying to drown out the whispers with the hum of technology and the glow of arc reactors. But no matter how many new suits he built, no matter how many upgrades he made, the feeling of helplessness persisted. He couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not Pepper, not Rhodey. How could he? He was Tony Stark, Iron Man. He was supposed to have all the answers, supposed to be in control. Admitting that he wasn't, it wasn't an option. The nightmares were the worst. Dark, twisted visions where Tony's suits of armor turned against him, trapping him inside, suffocating him as the world crumbled around him. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart racing, his mind screaming at him to get up, to do something. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control. Then came the day when the whispers turned into something more. Tony was in the middle of a meeting at Stark Industries when his arc reactor flickered. For a brief moment, the glow that had been a constant part of his life for so long dimmed, and Tony felt a surge of panic. He excused himself from the meeting, rushing to his lab to check the reactor. But as he stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reactor in his chest, the voice came again, louder this time, more insistent. You can't control it, Stark. It's all falling apart. Tony's breath caught in his throat. His hands shook as he reached for the reactor, his mind racing with fear and doubt. Was it malfunctioning? Was he dying? Or was something far worse happening? Before he could answer those questions, the room around him shifted. The walls seemed to warp and twist, the lights flickering as shadows crept in from the corners of the room. Tony stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest as the shadows grew darker, more tangible. "You think you can control everything," the voice said, its tone dripping with contempt. "But you can't even control yourself." The shadows coalesced into a figure, its form indistinct but menacing. Tony's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Was this some kind of hallucination? A trick? Or was it real? "Who are you?" Tony demanded, his voice steady despite the panic coursing through him. The figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating. "I am the truth you've been running from, Stark. The truth that no matter how smart you are, no matter how many suits you build, you will never be in control." Tony's fists clenched. "I've faced worse than you." The figure laughed, a cold, empty sound. "You think this is about me? This is about you, your fear, your failure." Tony's mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of panic and confusion. He had always prided himself on his ability to outthink, to outmaneuver any threat. But now, faced with something he couldn't understand, he felt the one thing he had spent his entire life trying to avoid: helplessness. The figure loomed over him, its voice soft but relentless. "You built your entire life on control, Stark. But control is an illusion. And now, it's slipping through your fingers." Tony's heart pounded in his chest as the full weight of the figure's words hit him. The control he had fought so hard to maintain, the control that had defined him as Ironman, was crumbling. And no matter how hard he tried, no matter how many suits he built, he couldn't stop it. "You can't control everything," the figure whispered, its voice fading into the shadows. "You never could." The last thing Tony saw before the darkness consumed him was his own reflection, staring back at him from the surface of the arc reactor in his chest. A reflection of a man who had finally lost control. This is the tragedy of Tony Stark, the man who tried to control the world, only to realize that the world, and himself, were never truly under his command.